There is a stretch of cracked highway that winds along the Missouri River, stained with rust-colored dust and lit by long, humming lamps that buzz like cicadas in August heat. On those nights when the power grid holds and the sodium lights flare, the road looks almost holy, a ribbon of gold stitched across the endless prairie, promising every traveler a safe return. Imam Yusuf once told me that roads are like verses in the Qur'an, plain in daylight, but alive with revelation when evening hushes the world. I was too young to grasp it then, yet the image clung to me, as stubborn as river silt in boot treads. Rashid, my father, kept a diner beside that road, a low building painted the pale blue of a forgotten sky, its windows greasy with the breath of friars and morose truckers. On the back wall he had pinned a single sheet of paper, laminated to survive the years: "If Allah should aid you, no one can overcome you, but if he should forsake you, who is there that can aid you after him?" He had copied the line from Surah Al-Imran, verses 160 to 162, scrawling it in a looping hand that betrayed both his Syrian schoolteacher and the American cursive he acquired in night classes. Regulars assumed it was a proverb about grit, only those of us raised on the rhythm of the Quran felt the deeper weight behind each syllable. Every story begins somewhere farther back than memory admits. Mine begins the autumn Karim al-Bakri stepped from a dust-caked bus and into the loose booth by the jukebox, boots split at the welt, suit pressed but fraying at the cuffs, a battered briefcase clamped in both hands as though it held the final ember of his life. He wore a smile tuned precisely to Midwest cordiality, wide enough to appear earnest, narrow enough not to threaten. Before serving him, my father turned the laminated sheet so the words faced inward, almost shy, though Karim could not have read them at that distance. Karim ordered black coffee, no sugar, and lingered over it until the creamer skin hardened and sank. Truckers cycled in, slurping chili and weather talk. He listened as though every syllable were a confession. When the bell above the door finally fell silent, he paid with a crisp 50, waving off the change, a gesture that flashed generosity yet smelled faintly of calculation. As he rose, his eyes fixed on the hidden verse as though drawn by magnetic ink. He said, "Faith pinned to a wall is still faith. But faith lived is more powerful." My father flinched, the way a soldier startles at the snap of a twig long after the war. Later, in the storeroom, he confided that such fluency in Quranic cadence could not belong to a stranger by chance. A man like that, he warned, either carries a blessing or hides a storm. Karim returned nightly. He brought small gifts, dates wrapped in newspaper, a dog-eared volume of Gibran, a radio tuned permanently to jazz that he left on the counter as though gifting the diner its own pulse. Business bloomed, truckers tipped better, drawn by Karim's effortless grace with anecdotes about Damascus alleyways and Brooklyn skylines. He spoke of Islam with the easy humility of someone polishing an heirloom lantern, brightening but never boasting. Yet when silence fell, a glint like cold iron surfaced in his gaze, hinting at rooms within rooms where intentions sharpened like knives. Winter crawled down from the Dakotas, sheathing fences in glassy armor. One bitter night Karim burst through the doors, cheeks scoured by wind, and announced he had purchased the abandoned grain elevator by the river. He would transform it, he said, into a cooperative. Locals could store harvests rent-free, gaining leverage over predatory buyers. The plan sounded righteous, almost prophetic. He quoted the Prophet's injunction against cheating merchants, his voice quivering like a minaret call vibrating across empty streets. Townsfolk, long bruised by agri-conglomerates, stampeded to invest, small sums, mostly, gleaned from glove compartment envelopes and coffee can savings. My father invested the diner's winter surplus, hope swelling inside him like yeast. Construction began at dawn 2 weeks later. Karim hired every able hand, paying day laborers in cash that smelled newly printed. But where the money came from, no one asked. Instead they worked by floodlight, swinging hammers to Coltrane solos echoing from Karim's old radio, as if jazz might pour mercy into cracked concrete. I watched from the diner's frosted window, feeling the town's heartbeat quicken under Karim's vision. Yet even devotion casts a shadow. Imam Yusuf, who taught Quran in a prefab classroom beside the mosque's trailer minaret, warned during Friday khutbah that deceit often masquerades as charity, citing the same verses my father had pinned: those who bartered truth for falsehood, those who sold hereafter for the world, their refuge is the fire. He did not name Kareem, but eyes slid toward the elevator rising like a monolith against the pewter sky. That night Kareem arrived late, palms bruised purple from cold, yet his smile burned brighter than the diner's neon sign. He spread blueprints across a booth, intricate lines, measurements beyond my comprehension. But in the swirl of ink I glimpsed something off: storage volumes impossibly large for the elevator's footprint, revenue projections ballooning like fairy tales. I asked about contingencies. What if floods swallowed the riverbank? Kareem clapped my shoulder, calling me prudent, calling me brother, weaving assurances so silvery I almost believed my own doubts had been sinful. When he left, a gust slammed the door, the laminated verse fluttered from its tack, skittering across tile before lodging beneath the jukebox. I stooped to retrieve it, heart hammering without cause, yet suspecting cause lurked in every shadow Kareem cast. February thawed abruptly, sending snowmelt gushing through culverts, swelling the river until it gnawed the levee like a starved beast. Sirens wailed, volunteers stacked sandbags under sleet that drove needles into skin. Kareem arrived in a yellow slicker, orchestrating relief with a general's bark. He positioned trucks, rerouted traffic, even prayed beside soaked earth, palms upturned, beseeching Allah for mercy. Cameras from St. Louis captured his heroics, broadcasting them to a nation hungry for redemption narratives. Donations poured in, wire transfers, PayPal alerts, envelopes stuffed with cash. Kareem funneled every penny, he said, into reinforcing the grain elevator so it could double as flood shelter. 3 nights later, the levee snapped like a rib. Water exploded across fields, devouring tractors and barns, hurling propane tanks like tin toys. The town blinked into darkness. People fled toward higher ground, and toward Kareem's elevator, its steel doors crowned by generator light. Inside, pallets of supplies lay stacked from floor to ceiling: bottled water, blankets, canned beans labeled in languages half the town could not read. Kareem greeted each family by name, shepherding them like a prophet guiding a remnant through desert night. For 48 hours we lived in the cavernous belly of that building. Children sang surahs beneath hanging lamps, the echo haunting and lovely. Kareem strode among us, recounting hadith about rain as mercy, promising the flood's lesson would sew our hearts closer. Eyes glistened, even skeptics softened. Until the third dawn, when the sheriff's deputy arrived by boat, radios crackling rumors. Government inspectors had traced missing FEMA supplies to this very elevator, pallets matching serial numbers ripped from emergency reserves meant for hurricane zones. Licenses forged, signatures faked. And every investor's dollar, it seemed, had funded the theft. Kareem did not flee. He stood upon a makeshift dais of shrink-wrapped rice sacks, face drained. His voice, once velvet, cracked like old paint. He spoke of intentions misunderstood, of middlemen corrupting transactions, of paperwork mangled by bureaucracy. Yet the ledgers told a simpler tale, profiteering under the veil of piety. Some screamed, others wept, my father merely stared, as though trying to recognize the man who once tasted his coffee in silent reverence. Deputies cuffed Kareem, reading rights that sounded hollow against rising wind. As they led him out, Riverwater lapped the threshold, carrying a curled scrap of paper: if Allah should aid you. The verse floated briefly, then sank, ink bleeding into gray water until nothing remained but a white ghost of itself. We evacuated when waters fell. The elevator, deprived of its architect, stood gutted, supplies seized, steel shell echoing with rust and regret. Investors gathered in my father's diner, clutching foreclosure notices. Lawyers shook their heads, assets frozen, restitution unlikely. Some cursed Islam, painting Kareem's sin across an entire faith like graffiti across stone. Imam Yusuf countered with patience, quoting verse after verse on justice, on personal accountability. But grief is a wild animal, it bites the hand that tries to soothe it. One evening, weeks later, my father found the laminated verse beneath a booth, edges warped. He pressed it flat, then did something that startled me: he tore it in half, kissed the pieces, and set them gently into the trash. "The words live here," he said, tapping his chest. "Walls don't keep them safe." The highway kept humming, indifferent. But every time the lamps flickered, I saw Karim's silhouette framed in gold, a caution etched into night itself. Deception may masquerade as hope, but the Qur'an's promise remains: if God withdraws his aid, no alliance of silver-tongued men can shield you from the flood. Spring crawled into our valley on elbows and knees, dressing the ruined cornfields with a shy green haze, but few noticed. We were too busy auditing losses. Bushels rotted in silos, diesel pickups sunk nose first into silt, the very bones of our livelihoods clotted with river mud. My father reopened the diner on credit, the freezer hummed like a tired animal, half-empty shelves reflecting fluorescent glare. Customers came out of loyalty, not hunger, and when they slid their coins across the counter I sensed embarrassment in the gesture, as though payment itself exposed how little remained between them and destitution. A FEMA adjuster named Daly parked his sedan behind the diner one afternoon, collar unbuttoned, clipboard sagging with forms that smelled of basement ink. He ordered nothing, only flipped through spreadsheets, lips moving without sound. Finally he looked up and said, almost gently, that restitution from Karim's conviction would, if it ever arrived, amount to pennies on each dollar lost. He shuffled money through 6 shells across 3 states, Daly explained, tracing phantom loops on the counter. That trail ends in smoke. When my father asked why government lawyers could not seize whatever profit was hidden, Daly's gaze traveled to the laminated verse now taped above the coffee urn. He read it aloud in a halting Midwestern cadence, then sighed as though the words answered the question better than he could. News drifted in fragments: a federal grand jury impaneled in Kansas City, charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, misappropriation of federal aid, bail denied after prosecutors revealed a passport tucked inside Karim's briefcase, pages studded with visas from cities neither map nor memory could easily place. I felt equal parts vindication and grief, the two emotions braiding until they were indistinguishable. At night I lay awake listening to freight trains moan across trestles, the wheeled lament echoing through my sternum. Somewhere in that restless dark, I decided to witness the trial myself, not out of spite, but because a story half-seen festers like an unhealed wound. Kansas City's federal courthouse was all glass and granite, modern civics wrapped in mirror polish. Inside, air conditioning raised gooseflesh on summer arms. Reporters hunched over laptops, the clatter of keys like hail on tin. When Karim entered, flanked by marshals, the room inhaled as one. He wore the same tailored suit I remembered, though the fabric now drooped from his shoulders as if gravity had grown impatient. His wrists bore shackles, yet his posture suggested he merely clasped his hands behind him in thoughtful repose. Our eyes met for an instant, recognition flickered, then he offered a faint nod, as though greeting an old business partner instead of a witness to his ruin. The prosecution presented ledgers swollen with zeros, invoices for non-existent concrete, payments routed through charities that existed only as letterheads, FEMA serial numbers doctored with printer ink still glossy beneath ultraviolet lamp. Emails projected on the screen showed Karim counseling an associate to blur the righteous with the profitable, urging speed before the tide of pity recedes. Each exhibit landed like a body on asphalt. Yet when his attorney, court-appointed, underpaid, rose to cross-examine, Karim's voice poured through the room again, low and warm, coiled with parables. He spoke of intention, quoting a hadith about deeds judged by purpose. He painted himself as a man who tried to splice mercy into a cruel economic lattice and lost control when bureaucrats throttled supply chains. Jurors leaned forward, the human hunger for redemption warring against arithmetic. During recess I stepped outside, the plaza baking under Kansas sun. Imam Yusuf appeared beside me, robe catching in the wind like a sail. He had driven overnight, called by a duty he did not specify. We found shade beneath a honey locust and watched pigeons stagger through fountain mist. The verses at Uhud were revealed after archers disobeyed the Prophet, he reminded me, gently, as though I were still the boy memorizing Surah Al-Falaq in his trailer classroom. They abandoned their posts for the spoils below, convinced victory was certain. In that lapse, defeat pierced them. He paused. Karim's downfall is not singular, it mirrors every moment when desire overran trust. Inside, the defense unfurled its final card, a character witness, a woman named Aisha who claimed Karim funded her oncology treatments in Damascus years prior. She described him carrying buckets of clean water through sniper alleys, trading his coat for insulin on the black market. Her testimony oiled the gears of sympathy. I felt mine shift despite myself. Yet prosecutors countered with flight records showing Karim had been in Dubai during the months of her illness. Aisha wilted under the contradiction. In the gallery, murmurs thickened into a storm. The verdict came just past twilight, guilty on all counts. Karim remained serene, as though the jury foreman merely confirmed knowledge he carried already. Sentencing was scheduled for autumn, until then he would reside in Clay County Jail. Cameras flashed, headlines sprouted like mushrooms after rain. Back home, televisions in the diner looped the same footage, his cuffs glinting each time, a morbid strobe that washed every booth in white remorse. Summer deepened. Crop dusters stitched chemicals across fields, but floods had salted the soil, stalks grew patchy, leaves yellowed at the vein. Bills mounted faster than seedlings. People quarreled at town hall meetings, their unity dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. Some blamed federal negligence, others cursed words seldom uttered near a church. My father listened, wiping counters with mechanical devotion. When asked for his opinion, he repeated only this: Allah tests whom he loves. One humid evening, a letter arrived addressed to me in Karim's looping calligraphy. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paperbacks. Inside, 3 pages filled margin to margin, an apology. A confession? No, an invitation. Karim requested I visit, insisting he had truth to unburden, truth that might salvage what remained of our broken township. Part of me longed to hurl the letter into the trash, yet curiosity, that sly companion of every fall, urged compliance. I drove north the next Sunday, thunderheads bruising the horizon, the highway glimmering like a blade. Clay County Jail squatted behind razor wire, fluorescent bulbs bleaching hope from the air. In the visitation bay, phones crackled through scratched plexiglass. Karim looked thinner, beard peppered with gray, but his eyes retained that mercurial shine. He pressed palm to glass, a gesture of brotherhood I left unmet. He spoke swiftly, as though fearing time itself might interrupt. Money remained, he claimed, funds hidden beyond prosecutorial reach, enough to reimburse investors, rebuild levees, seed new harvests. Accounts nested inside accounts, accessible only through codes he memorized. He would relinquish them if I, and only I, carried the coordinates to the people. An amana, he said, using the Arabic for sacred trust. I asked why not speak in court, or to federal agents. He leaned closer until his breath fogged the partition. The state will swallow it in fees. But you, I know your heart. You serve community above self. Distrust sparked like static, yet a different spark, of possibility, kindled beside it. What if he spoke truth? What if buried within his duplicity lay a shard of redemption the town desperately needed? I promised nothing, left sooner than guards expected. In the parking lot, rain began, fat drops tapping the hood, each one echoing the doubt straining my ribs. That night I opened Qur'an to the verses my father once displayed. I read them aloud, voice shaky, so let the believers place their trust in Allah. Nowhere did the lines say trust a man merely because he cloaks himself in scripture. The surah continued, if anyone turns away, Allah is self-sufficient, praiseworthy. I closed the book, its gilded edge catching lamplight like a drawn horizon. Days passed, letter followed letter, Karim's tone shifting from supplication to subtle menace. The money would vanish if I remained silent, opportunities dissolve, God holds the greatest accounts, but even God expects his servants to act. My sleep fractured into jagged segments, dreams filled with elevators flooding anew, currency swirling like leaves around drowning faces. I considered confiding in Imam Yusuf, but he was away attending a seminary conference. My father, meanwhile, spoke less each sunrise, as though words had grown too costly. Then, a week before sentencing, the prison transport van carrying Karim and 3 other inmates flipped on the interstate, skidding across rain-slick asphalt into a ditch. Reports varied, some said a tire blew, others claimed the driver swerved to avoid a deer. The vehicle rolled twice, steel roof concertinaed, windows bursting in glittering shards. One guard sustained a concussion, the other inmates crawled out with broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Karim alone remained pinned, torso crushed beneath the bench seat. Rescue crews worked by floodlight, hydraulic shears shrieking. He was alive when they reached him, whispering verses none could decipher through the blood in his throat. He died 47 minutes later beneath a sky that threatened more rain. News of the crash struck town like a second flood, but reactions split along fracture lines long forming. Some muttered about divine justice, citing the hadith where the prophet warned that deceit planted in the earth would bear only poisonous fruit. Others shook heads, insisting even a deceiver deserves due process, that death cheats the accounting. My own reaction did not surface, it churned beneath layers of relief and unresolved anger. 3 days after the accident, a certified package arrived from a law firm in Omaha. Inside, a thumb drive, a notarized statement, and a single sentence in Karim's handwriting, "The Amana now rests with you." The statement empowered me to act as executor of certain digital assets, providing passcodes and server addresses scattered across the globe. My pulse hammered. If genuine, these credentials might unlock the funds he promised; if false, they could trigger traps that returned only humiliation, or worse, legal peril. I drove to St. Louis, booked a terminal in a public library's computer lab, and typed the first string of numerals. Screens shifted, Swiss interface, then encrypted vaults blossoming like metallic flowers. Figures appeared, accounts totaling more than the combined annual income of our county. My brain stuttered, disbelief snarling with elation. Yet each transaction bore tags linking them to charities defrauded, governments swindled, disasters exploited. The money was both cure and curse, sodden with suffering. I logged off, heart pounding so fiercely I feared librarians might hear. Somewhere in the stacks a child laughed at a comic strip, the clean innocence of the sound slicing through me. I realized then that whatever I chose, cost would follow. Disperse the funds quietly, and I became complicit in laundering stolen aid. Turn them over to authorities, and bureaucracy might reclaim every cent, leaving our town no better. Keep them secret, and the weight would consume me, the way the river consumed levees. On the drive home, dusk smeared orange across wheat stubble. I pulled to the shoulder, engine idling, and recited the opening of Surah Al-Fatiha, voice trembling, a plea for guidance along the straight path, a recognition of those who earned God's anger by straying. Wind rattled the roadside grass like pages turning. The choice lay ahead, wide as that cracked highway, and where it bent beyond sight I could not yet see whether mercy or further reckoning waited. If Allah should aid you, no one can overcome you. But sometimes aid arrives as thorn rather than bandage, forcing the traveler to study each step before pressing onward. Dawn arrived thin and reluctant, a smear of pewter on the eastern lip of the plains, yet I was already awake, fingers cramped around a styrofoam mug whose coffee had long since gone the color of river water. The thumb drive lay on the diner's counter beneath the humming ballast light, its plastic shell no larger than a crucifix pendant yet somehow heavier than the till and jukebox combined. Each time I glanced at it, verses whispered inside my skull, and do not consume one another's wealth unjustly, nor deliberately bribe officials in order to devour a portion of others' property, sinfully, while you know. It is the 36th verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, Imam Yusuf once said, and his students nodded, filing it away like emergency rations never meant for use. But now the words tasted metallic in my mouth, blooming with the rusty tang of real consequence. My father emerged from the kitchen, apron smeared with batter, gaze traveling from my blanching knuckles to the dormant drive. Bad company, he muttered, not meaning Karim alone but the phantom legion of his choices that still lingered, clinging to our air like grease smoke. He folded newspaper clippings beside the register, corn futures down, federal recovery check stalled in committee, Clay County's jailhouse accident rebranded by pundits as a morality play. Every headline teased the same moral: cheat and be crushed. But the story now stretched beyond Kareem's crushed ribs. It unspooled through circuit boards and cloud servers, braiding itself onto my bloodstream like a parasite demanding host. I confessed everything in a torrent: letters, codes, the vault swimming with money loosed from noble origins into ignoble hands. My father listened, face as still as winter fields. When I finished he said, "Charity offered by a thief is like meat sacrificed to idols. The flesh is there, but the blessing is stripped." He squeezed my shoulder, neither comforting nor chastising, simply anchoring me to his love. Then he retreated to flip pancakes for customers who would never taste the turmoil sizzling in that cramped kitchen. Word of Kareem's hidden fortune seeped into town by means mysterious as osmosis. Rumor inflated the sum beyond arithmetic, trading hallways claimed it might rival lottery jackpots. The sheriff visited the diner under the guise of lunch, eyes scanning every corner as if money might manifest in a sugar packet. He asked whether I'd received any unusual correspondence, his voice slick with practiced indifference. I shook my head, and the lie scattered across my tongue like salt on ice. That night, lightning bruised the sky purple and green, throwing jagged shadows of cottonwoods across bedroom walls. I booted my rusting Lenovo and connected through layers of onion-routed anonymity, fingers slippery on the keys. One by one the dormant accounts bloomed again, balance fields glowing with figures so tall they scrolled off the screen. A single transfer, just a test, I told myself, could clear every mortgage within a 100-mile radius. Yet to touch those funds felt like dipping a ladle into poisoned honey, sweetness cloaking a fatal sting. My cursor hovered over the download statements link until my eyes burned. In desperation I opened another tab and searched for commentary on the verse from Surah An-Niz that warns believers not to betray trusts. Tafsir al-Tabari, Tafsir ibn Kathir, modern scholars' lectures archived on university servers, each exhorted the same: an amana is no light ornament. It is a chain that binds the soul to accountability on the day when bones testify. I closed the laptop, palms sweating, certain that continuing alone would warp me into a poor replica of Kareem, fluent in scripture yet deaf to its music. At dawn I drove to the mosque's temporary trailer, still smelling of plywood and lemon cleanser, and found Imam Yusuf kneeling on the prayer rug, his tasbih clacking softly between calloused fingers. Sunlight lanced through plastic blinds, striping his face with bars of gold and shadow. I spoke in low tones, recounting everything while the beads tallied his silent dhikr. When I finished, he exhaled as though releasing ancient grief. Money taken unlawfully, he said, is like blood in the arteries of injustice. Yet if returning it whole is impossible, scholars differ: distribute it to those wronged, to the poor, or to communal benefit, provided one seeks no personal gain. He looked at me, eyes bright with unshed tears. But intention alone cannot purify stolen wealth. Only transparency, my son. Secrets breed mold. We agreed on a plan as fragile as newborn clay: convert the funds into a public trust administered by a consortium of voices immune to local schisms, federal inspectors, state auditors, leaders from Christian churches, our tiny synagogue, the mosque. Every disbursement would be logged, every receipt published online for any citizen to audit. Transparency like floodlights, pushing back the rot. Imam Yusuf warned it would attract both bureaucratic resistance and opportunists waxing righteous for their slice of salvation. Before we could act, the first anonymous emails arrived, each signed Kays, after the mysterious guide who confounded Moses. They warned that meddling with Kareem's bequest would awaken men harsher than marshals, cartel accountants, oily politicians, phantom charities erected to launder regime's atrocities. One attachment displayed a grainy photo of my father locking the diner's door, a timestamp no more than 30 minutes old. Another email listed the VIN of my pickup, the elementary school bus route of my niece in Omaha. Fear entered me with surgical precision, anesthetic in reverse. I felt every cell contract. Imam Yusuf urged patience and counsel, I countered with urgency. Threats fed on hesitation. We drafted a disclosure letter to the federal district attorney, explaining the accounts, offering cooperation. Before we mailed it, however, the sheriff returned, this time brandishing a warrant citing probable cause of stolen federal property. Deputies toppled syrup bottles, seized computer towers, and pried up floorboards as though cash might bloom like mushrooms. They left empty-handed yet triumphant, carrying away the thumb drive and my battered laptop in evidence bags. Humiliation struck sharper than loss. Town gossip flared, maybe Rashid's boy had joined Karim's fraud from the start. Maybe the diner's miracle reopening was funded by FEMA pallets sold on eBay. Customers dwindled. Graffiti bloomed overnight on the diner's rear wall, "Thieves read Qur'an too." My father scrubbed it at dawn, water running pink with paint, face unreadable. With digital keys gone, access to the fortune seemed severed, yet the threat remained. A man in a charcoal suit intercepted me outside the grocery, badge carelessly flashed, Department of Homeland Security's Financial Crimes Division. He spoke like a script, tongue clicking on each consonant. Karim's network, he said, extended beyond agriculture scams, human smuggling routes in the southwest, counterfeit pharmaceuticals drifting into Appalachian clinics. They suspected portions of the fortune-financed extremist cells overseas. "We want your cooperation," he said, "for your country's sake and your own." In that moment the ground buckled, not from seismic shift but from the awful velocity of assumptions colliding. I saw myself through his lens, Muslim male of immigrant parentage, inheritor of suspicious code from a dead conman. He offered no guarantee, only veiled threats of material witness subpoenas, asset freezes, watch lists that erode identity like acid. I demanded a lawyer. He slipped a card into my jacket and vanished among parked cars. That night Imam Yusuf and I met in his trailer's kitchenette, its single bulb fizzing with moths. He disclosed that the mosque's donation account, meager yet crucial, had been flagged for audit without explanation. "Invisible hands pinch wherever we move," he said, voice strained. We prayed Salat al-Istikhara, seeking guidance. My forehead pressed carpet until the scent of wool and dust fused with my breath, but no clarifying dream visited me by dawn. Meanwhile, the river receded to reveal twisted remnants of last year's harvest, stalks bleached bone white. My father's diner teetered on collapse, produced deliveries skipped due to unpaid invoices. One afternoon he found a foreclosure notice taped to the front door, ink running where dew had seeped. He removed it quietly, folding it into his apron pocket like an unpaid check, then resumed pouring coffee for 2 remaining patrons who pretended not to notice. In desperation I drove 3 hours to a cybersecurity firm in Columbia, Missouri, former classmates of mine from community college who now lived among humming server racks and energy drink cans. They agreed to clone my confiscated hard drive from a cloud backup I'd forgotten still idled online. With new credentials we regained entry to the vaults. But covert access felt like trespassing within my own conscience. Each click risked triggering silent alarms, yet doing nothing invited ruin for everyone I loved. We initiated the first transfer, an escrow account under state oversight earmarked for levee reconstruction. The sum, $5 million, moved through compliance tunnels, clearing anti-money laundering filters in 48 hours. Newspaper headlines erupted, anonymous benefactor funds flood recovery. Pundits speculated about philanthropic tech billionaires, yet suspicion sharpened within agencies already scenting my digital fingerprints. 2 days later, Homeland Security froze the escrow, citing irregular origination. Construction crews halted mid-dig as cranes sagged like starving giraffes. Emails from Kays returned, mocking the futility of bureaucratic charity. This time photos depicted Imam Yusuf entering his trailer, red crosshairs superimposed on the plywood door. The message read, "Secrets desire silence. You have 1 week." I forwarded it to the sheriff, but he dismissed it as online theatrics. Fear thickened until every engine backfire sounded like gunfire, every anonymous pickup tailing my route became a potential hearse. Unable to sleep, I drove to the riverbank under a moon the color of tarnished nickel. Water lapped at bleaching driftwood, cicadas droned like faulty transformers. I recalled Karim standing on crates during the flood, weaving jazz and scripture into one intoxicating spell. How effortlessly we mistook charisma for sincerity. I wondered whether he foresaw this spiral or merely danced along its rim until gravity yanked him under. In the half-light I contemplated wiping the vaults, delete, nullify, consign the poison honey to digital oblivion. But would erasing the funds absolve or worsen the harm? Those dollars, though tainted, might still irrigate futures if poured through channels clean and public. The Qur'an speaks of water descending from the sky to revive dead earth, yet the same water can drown crops when levees fail. It is the vessel that dictates blessing or calamity. I knelt and scooped river water, letting it stream through my fists, thinking of Prophet Ayyub who endured every loss yet remained patient. I imagined the townspeople, their wrists bone-thin from trimming grocery lists to essentials, their children sleeping in FEMA trailers still reeking of disinfectant. Karim's money could buy back their mornings. Or it could ensnare them in investigations stretching decades, their hopes subpoenaed as evidence. 2 nights later a Molotov cocktail sailed through the diner's front window, fireball blooming against formica tables. My father and I managed to smother flames with wet burlap, but smoke curled into ceiling tiles, blackening 20 years of grease into carcinogenic lace. The sheriff chalked it up to teenage vandalism. We knew better. Kays had ceased warning, he had begun demonstration. Insurance adjusters arrived the next day, only to note our policy had lapsed the previous month when automated drafts bounced from an overdrawn account. My father leaned against the charred counter, shoulders rounded as though he carried the roof. The verse is true, he whispered, invoking the Qur'an my mother once recited when storms rattled windowpanes. When Allah withdraws his aid, no fortress stands. He wasn't blaming God, he was acknowledging our drift away from divine anchor, buffeted by every rogue wave of fear and greed. I drove to Kansas City again, this time to the federal courthouse not as spectator but supplicant. With trembling resolve I requested a meeting with Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Kim, the woman who had prosecuted Karim. After hours of metal detectors and clipboard sign-ins, she ushered me into a sterile conference room, its walls empty, echoing. I laid out everything, the thumb drive, the threats, the frozen escrow, my desire to transfer the entire sum under judicial supervision for communal restitution. She listened, face unreadable, then leaned back and steepled her fingers. Do you realize, she said, this confession could implicate you in laundering, obstruction, and maybe accessory after the fact? I nodded. She asked why I had waited. I spoke of amana, of fear, of the Qur'an's demand for honesty even when it hammers the self. Her expression softened by degrees, skepticism tempered by something like respect. Over the following week, agents escorted me through debriefings where every password was recited, every transfer traced. They seized the clone drive, placed me under temporary protective custody at a roadside motel whose curtains smelled of ancient smoke. From there I watched local news show levee workers returning, courtesy of federal emergency funds unfrozen after prosecutors intervened. They did not mention my name or Karim's, only a cooperative resolution. Yet outside the motel, a sedan idled at odd hours, driver obscured by tinted glass, whether federal escort or lurking threat, I could not tell. On Friday, after Jumu'ah prayers delivered in a borrowed church basement, the mosque trailer now under arson investigation, Imam Yusuf approached with red eyes. Workers repairing the levee had found a steel lockbox buried beneath the grain elevator's foundation. Inside, passports, cryptocurrency cold wallets, and a notebook filled with elegiac Arabic verse interlaced with coordinates. Karim's final secret. Federal agents swooped before locals could pry further. Speculation swarmed faster than flies. Was it ransom to silence partners? A dead man switch? Seeds of another fraud? I thought of Karim bleeding under the crushed seat, murmuring scripture. Perhaps in that twilight he grasped what even prophets have pleaded for, forgiveness that outpaces failure. Maybe the box was a last attempt to pivot his legacy from deceit to benefaction. Or maybe it was just another shell in the infinite nesting doll of his scheming. Toward evening I returned to the motel to find the door ajar. Inside, drawers gutted, mattress knifed, my suitcase emptied like a carcass. Scrawled on the mirror in toothpaste, Amana broken, judgment near. No valuables missing, only the sense of safety, which is priceless currency. Federal marshals relocated me within the hour, drafting paperwork that smelled of crisis management. They promised an investigation. Their eyes, however, whispered you invited this storm. Weeks stretched into late September. Court filings churned, hearings adjourned. The diner reopened on a shoestring, walls repainted a hopeful sunflower yellow, though the jukebox now stood silent, its speakers melted by heat. Customers trickled back, hungry less for food than for proof we still belonged to one another. My father greeted each by name, his smile a tenuous treaty against despair. One crisp evening Imam Yusuf gathered townsfolk in the community college auditorium. Federal liaisons presented a restitution fund, the money scrubbed clean through judicial forfeiture, earmarked for levee fortification, soil remediation, scholarship grants for children displaced by the flood. Every cent traceable, every withdrawal requiring signatures across denominational lines. As the figures projected on the screen, a hush settled. Hope, starved but not dead, stirred like embers touched by bellows. A woman in the back row, widow of a farmer lost to flood-borne pneumonia, stood trembling. Will accepting this curse us again? She asked. Isn't money like water, if poisoned once, forever tainted? Imam Yusuf lifted the microphone, voice steady. When a thief's hoard is recaptured, it becomes spoils to distribute with justice. The Prophet peace be upon him returns stolen wealth to the people. The sin clings to the sinner, not the coin. The widow's shoulders eased, yet I sensed the town would carry scars the way old trees carry lightning burns, wounds sealed but visible, warning future climbers. Afterward, under an amber parking lot lamp, Federal Attorney Rachel Kim shook my hand. The charges against you, she said, will not proceed. Cooperation counts. Relief flooded my limbs yet immediately ebbed, leaving exhaustion. She added that authorities were pursuing persons of interest, tied to the Qaeda threats, results uncertain. Justice, I realized, is never swift, it limps, drags, sometimes circles back to interrogate those it meant to protect. Driving home, I passed the skeletal elevator, now slated for demolition under Army Corps supervision. In my high beams, rust streaked its corrugated walls like dried blood. I parked on the shoulder, engine ticking as it cooled, and approached the fence where wild sunflowers nodded. I pressed my palm to the chain link and whispered Al-Fatiha for Karim's soul, uncertain whether he warranted mercy or further accounting. Yet Qur'an reminds, my mercy encompasses all things. Perhaps that includes even architects of calamity, if they seek it with sincerity unseen by juries. Back at the diner, my father had taped a fresh page to the wall, same verse, rewritten in his steady hand, but he added another line beneath in English, trust in God does not absolve the vigilant heart from caution. He winked when he saw me reading. The laminated edges curled gently, promises neither brittle nor naive. That night I slept without the taste of rust in my throat. The next morning brought crisp sunlight, the kind that sharpens cornstalk silhouettes against sky, and I realized the story had not ended, it had only crossed a ridgeline to a new valley whose terrain we could not yet map. The money would rebuild homes, fund clinics, maybe finance a library where future children, Muslim, Christian, skeptic alike, would read stories warning them how deception can masquerade as relief. And perhaps they would learn, sooner than we did, that amana is not weight one bears alone, it is a rope braided from every hand that holds it, strengthened or frayed with each choice. For now, I brewed coffee, uncoiled the diner's neon sign, and watched travelers glide along the highway. The golden ribbon still shimmered under dawn, unchanged yet forever altered in my eyes, a verse written across asphalt, reminding every soul that journeys are measured less by distance than by the integrity carried mile to mile. Somewhere within that humming light I heard the echo of Karim's final plea and Yusuf's counsel entwined, urging vigilance, inviting hope. The road stretched on, neither promise nor threat, only possibility, and I stepped forward, heart steady, trusting the one who never abandons those who seek him with honest breath. Autumn seeped in like slow ink, tinting the cottonwoods copper while county trucks rumbled along the half-finished levee, their diesel coughs harmonizing with distant combine engines. Up on the berms, crews in hard hats chattered about football scores and Thanksgiving plans, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the braided threads of federal oversight, communal hope, and unresolved menace that held their paychecks together. Every few days I drove past to photograph progress for the Restitution Board's website. Transparency, as Rachel Kim put it, had to shine brighter than a harvest moon. Every load of rip-rap, every cubic yard of clay, every invoice paid was uploaded before the coffee in my thermos cooled. The board itself, a patchwork of auditors in sensible shoes, local pastors, a rabbi who commuted from Jefferson City, and Imam Yusuf, met Tuesday nights in the community college library. They sat at a long table scarred by algebra students, laptops blooming like serviceberry petals, and argued over decimal places with a fervor that would have impressed medieval scholastics. Yet even within that procedural daylight I sensed thin fissures, a committee member whose brother owned the only cement company in 3 counties, a school superintendent worried the scholarship slice was shrinking, a state rep sniffing out headlines for re-election season. Money, even baptized by federal court order, still carried the musky perfume of original sin. The scent drifted beyond boardrooms. Anonymous flyers appeared on porch steps, justice funds terror. Ask your imam where the cash goes. Photos of Karim's crushed transport van were taped to mosque windows at dawn prayers. Someone daubed the words "Dogs of Uhud" in engine grease across the aluminum siding. Sheriff White filed each incident under vandalism and told the weekly paper his department monitored extremist chatter, but budget constraints kept him busy with copper wire thefts. The sense of being watched, weighed, and maybe cued for punishment followed me like frost breath in the pre-dawn dark. Then came the sabotage. It was a Thursday, sky the color of forged steel. A crane operator named Milt Gagnon, veteran of 3 levee seasons, fired up his lever at 6:30. The boom lurched, cables screamed, and a rivet as fat as my thumb sheared away, snapping the main hoist drum. 17 tons of granite armor stone dropped 6 feet and cratered the substrate. No one died, but 2 laborers caught the ricochet of broken shackles and left in ambulances, limbs folded at improper angles. Inspectors later found the locking cotter pins replaced with look-alike parts machined from cheap pot metal. Somebody knew what they were doing, the foreman muttered, kicking gravel that no longer trusted gravity. The board convened an emergency session. Flood control deadlines slipped, budgets stretched. Insurance adjusters prowled the site like buzzards, hinting premiums might spike unless hostile actor risk was addressed. An FBI liaison in a Navy windbreaker joined the Zoom call, citing credible intel that the restitution funds were a target for transnational crime. He recommended halting disbursements until a security audit cleared. Rachel Kim, jaw set, argued freezing the pipeline now would be a PR catastrophe. Karim's ghost would win, but the vote nodded into a deadlock. That night I drove the county backroads, headlights tunneling through maize stubble. My father rode shotgun, breath whistling with the soft wheeze of a man who once outworked storms but now tired after tying an apron. He said little until we topped a ridge overlooking the river. Levee lights glimmered like prayer beads lost in tall grass. Far beyond, the skeletal grain elevator awaited demolition, outlines softened by distance. I dreamed, he began, voice frayed, that the elevator stood whole again, but every grain it held was a human promise. And promises ferment if you store them too long, they burst and drown the keeper. He fell silent, eyes glossy. I felt the steering wheel vibrate beneath my palms, road washboard by last winter's freeze. Tension telescoped the weeks. Marshals traced the Kydra emails to servers rented with stolen IDs in Bratislava and Cebu, then lost the trail among VPN daisy chains. The diner limped, ceiling tiles still blotched from the Molotov smoke, until one November afternoon my father collapsed mid-order, spatula clanging to terrazzo like a cracked cymbal. Massive cardiac infarction, the ER doctor said, a dam burst after months of silent pressure. He survived, but the muscle was shredded. Discharge came with a bottle of beta blockers and a stack of low-sodium recipes he would never read. As I wheeled him through automatic doors, the river wind whipped dead leaves across the parking lot, hissing like distant applause for calamity. Hospital nights blurred, alarms beeping arabesques, fluorescence bleaching the notion of time. On the third evening, a figure materialized by the vending machines, denim jacket, camo cap pulled low, posture too still for a visitor. He slipped a padded envelope onto my lap, vanished down the stairwell. Inside lay a burner phone and a note scrawled in block letters, "Stop the fund or watch him die. Midnight. Call." My chest tightened, the corridor seeming to stretch infinitely, as if Allah bent space to test how far fear could walk before snapping. Midnight found me pacing the deserted chapel. I dialed. A voice modulated through software began reciting Qur'an, Surah Al-Imran, its verses about hoarders who count wealth thinking it will immortalize them. Then, the next cotter pin will hold up a roof over schoolchildren. Your choice cements their fate. The line cut. I lowered the phone, heart punching my ribs, knowing threats escalate when met with silence yet amplify when answered wrong. Imam Yusuf arrived before dawn, summoned by a text no less frantic for lacking vowels. He prayed by my father's bedside, then we retreated to the cafeteria, steam from styrofoam oatmeal fogging his glasses. Fear, he said, is a loan you pay interest on before the principal. He proposed taking the threat public, press conference, bodycam footage of the levee sabotage, the phone handed straight to the FBI. Transparency again. But transparency is glass, it can magnify as well as reveal, turning rumor into wildfire. Could the town stitched together trust survive another blaze? While we debated, a new email hit the board's shared drive, video clip shot at dusk, angle low. Heavy boots waded through shallow water toward the levee, stopping at the freshly poured tow ditch. A gloved hand produced a vial of murky liquid, poured it into the concrete, sulfuric acid, by the label. The camera panned up to catch the sunset glowing behind the silhouette of the elevator ruin. Overlay text pulsed, one foundation must fall. Choose. Timestamp indicated it had been filmed less than an hour earlier. Crews rushed and found the acid-etched ditch already flaking, another day of cure time lost. Insurance cancelled the policy outright. Without coverage, no contractor would risk continuing. Winter storms loomed upriver like loaded dice. Board members splintered. Local pastor Schaefer argued the fund should redirect to floodplain buyouts and let federal engineers finish the levee, in their own bureaucratic season. The rabbi insisted surrendering would reward terror. 2 city council reps resigned on camera, citing personal safety. Votes deadlocked until quorum evaporated. I drove home under a bruise-colored sky, dashboard clock blinking 12:07 a.m. out on Highway F, a lone semi idled on the shoulder. As I passed, its high beams flared, bleaching mirrors. My tires rattled over something, lengths of chain scattered across asphalt, barbed wire twisted to snag an axle. I swerved, fishtailed onto gravel, engine stalling. When silence fell, I heard soft clinks, chain being gathered. Figures in the semi-dark slipped behind the retreating semi. Only taillights remained, twin embers shrinking to black. By the time a tow truck hauled me home, adrenaline had migrated to rage. I no longer cared whether unlaundered dollars carried stigma, letting extortion dictate communal future felt a betrayal deeper than fraud. Dawn bled across kitchen linoleum as I re-accessed the vaults, authorizing 3 transfers, a bridge loan to the levee contractor bonded under federal surety, hazard pay grants to every worker on site, and escrow for security fencing with motion cameras. I hit execute, thumb vibrating on mouse. 3 hours later the FBI liaison phoned, half admiring, half scolding. He said protective custody was reinstated effective immediately. I told him I would not abandon my father's bedside. Agents took up posts in unmarked SUVs outside the hospital anyhow, antennas bristling like winter thistles. Threats escalated but shifted tone, now screenshots of account ledgers with my authorization codes highlighted, captions predicting prison. It dawned on me Kaid had root access to systems I deemed secure, perhaps he'd always had it, courtesy of Karim's original architecture. I envisioned a digital Jonah inside a whale of espionage. I could wrestle wires forever or pray for deliverance. Prayer arrived disguised as curiosity. Tracing metadata of the acid ditch video, FBI tech spotted a single unmasked MAC address pinging a rural telecom tower near the elevator site minutes before upload. Sheriff's cruisers, marshals, and bureau SUVs converged on a derelict livestock barn. Inside they found an array of satellite dishes, microcell repeaters, and a man bound to a chair with zip ties, eyes swollen shut. On his chest, a cardboard sign, "I am Kaider's voice, nothing more," along with a laptop wired to broadcast cellular signals through spoofed IMEI numbers. The captive was Milt Gagnon, the crane operator. He stammered through broken teeth that masked men seized him days after the cotter pin incident, forced him to record threats while they manipulated equipment. He'd heard them speak Arabic tinged with Gulf accents, complaining about missed payments. Bureau analysts cross-referenced Karim's offshore transfers. Among the shell accounts remained steady remittances to a desert magnate consulting, registered in Dubai, dissolved the week after Karim's death. The conspiracy's roots burrowed far deeper than our valley. Federal task forces bloom quickly when terror financing is alleged. Within 48 hours, subpoenas sprouted, airlines manifest combed, Interpol alerts pinged across time zones. In that rush, local issues risked drowning. I pushed Rachel Kim, would levy funds freeze again? Would the community pay for crimes orchestrated on another continent? Her reply came single sentence, "I'll protect the pipeline, get your town to daylight." Daylight meant town hall forums under escorted security, live streams explaining dollar flows, sermons comparing modern Amana to Ansar charity in Medina. Fear receded slowly, like frost line after equinox. Mailboxes stopped coughing threats. Instead envelopes arrived stuffed with handwritten questions, how to apply for soil grants, where to register for scholarship lotteries, whether the diner could cater volunteer lunches. Hope rediscovered its own inertia. One December morning, demolition charges felled the grain elevator at last. Spectators gathered beyond barricades, bundled in parkas, cheeks ruddy. I stood beside my father, who leaned on a cane, heartbeat murmuring through fingertips resting on my sleeve. The foreman counted down. Explosives burped, steel folded inward, dust ballooned the color of burnt sugar. The elevator collapsed without drama, like a bad sentence struck from the page. Applause scattered, uncertain, then grew loud enough to chase birds inland from the river. Under the settling haze, Imam Yusuf recited the supplication for new beginnings, "O turner of hearts, steady our hearts upon your obedience." His voice threaded through the dust motes, tying the scene to verses revealed centuries ago yet vividly present. I tasted grit on my tongue and realized it was equal parts concrete powder and relief. But night carried one last omen. Back at the diner, while wiping counters for the breakfast rush, I noticed an envelope slipped through the mail slot. Inside, a thumb drive identical to Karim's first gift and a note typed in serif font, "The harvest of deception is never fully reaped." No signature. The drive, when tested by Bureau Forensics, proved blank, no sectors written, no hidden partitions. Pure symbolism, or a taunt that more lay buried. Either way, I filed it in a tin box beside my Qur'an, reminder that vigilance and gratitude must share the same breath. Winter settled its quiet shawl. Range-fed cattle chewed cud beneath frost-rimmed trees, the river muscled under plates of ice, and levee crews wrapped projects ahead of schedule. My father returned to the grill, moving slower but smiling wider, flipping halal turkey patties for curious tourists. Each night I closed the diner, locked doors, and read verses aloud, "And whoever commits a wrong or sins against himself then seeks Allah's forgiveness will find Allah forgiving, merciful." The words no longer tasted metallic. They tasted like thawed snowmelt, cold but clean, carving paths through soil that would green when spring called the seeds. Somewhere, maybe in Dubai, maybe one county over, unseen adversaries recalibrated. But for the first time since Karim stepped off that dust-caked bus, the town met dawn without flinching at the hum of sodium lamps. Roads are still verses, Imam Yusuf insists, and tonight they read of journeys onward, not escapes backward. I pocket the diner key, feel its teeth press against my palm like a tiny, faithful compass, and step outside where the highway gleams under winter constellations, a gold ribbon stitched still tighter than fear. Snow came late that year, as though testing whether the new levee deserved the honor of a true Midwestern winter. It arrived on a January night so windless the flakes hovered like startled moths, layering the riverbank in hush. From the diner's window I watched headlights smear ghostly halos across the drifts, truck tires whispering over salted asphalt. Inside, the jukebox, finally repaired, warbled Coltrane's Naima, the same elegy Karim once played as blueprint to his illusions. Now the song sounded less like mourning and more like a fragile benediction, each saxophone note buoyed by the slow exhale of a town learning to inhale again. Recoveries rarely follow neat parabolas, they zigzag, catch on unseen nails. Insurance advisors returned, calculating premiums inside steaming mugs of diner coffee. The restitution board revised spreadsheets and clashed over decimal mites, yet soon scholarship letters fluttered into mailboxes, handwritten congratulations inked with gentle authority. Clay loam reclaimed its fertility beneath amendments paid for by tainted money scrubbed clean through relentless transparency. Even the scar where the grain elevator fell sprouted the earliest shoots of switchgrass, roots spiking deep to anchor soil against future floods. Creation, Imam Yusuf preached one frosted Friday, is a patient craftsman, he repairs with seasons, not seconds. Yet beneath progress lay unresolved sediment. The FBI task force had netted 2 operatives linked to desert magnate consulting, one in Dearborn, the other in Houston, men who wired funds to shell NGOs, men who pronounced Karim's name with the offhand familiarity of distant cousins. They spoke of directives, coded phrases, harvest before the threshers arrive, but refused to trace the true mastermind, invoking families overseas. Prosecutors hinted at international extradition standoffs and diplomatic fog. The case, like the river in thaw, continued to move but carried ice flows of secrecy. Each headline reopened whispers, who else might still lurk in our shadows? That question gained new edges when Leah Whitmore, editor of the County Weekly, phoned me with worry needling her voice. Strange discrepancies surfaced in the levee project's change orders, quantities inflated, materials downgraded after inspection. One subcontractor, new to the region, boasted offices that proved to be a rented mailbox in Tulsa. Leah feared graft had slithered back under the construction trailers, feasting on the very fund crafted to repel corruption. At first I bristled, vigilance had become ritual, our audits exhaustive. But memories of Karim's silver tongue cooled my defensiveness. I promised to investigate. I started with invoices, serials, signatures, seal stamps curling at the edges. Patterns emerged, too tidy, almost rehearsed. Pallets of rebar logged on snowy days when the access road was officially closed, diesel deliveries marked in gallons exceeding the site's storage tank capacity. The name atop each change order, inevitably, was Forefront Logistics LLC, the newcomer from Tulsa. Forefront had passed initial vetting, its insurance and bonding impeccable. Yet a background search revealed the company birthed only 6 months ago, its founder listed as Edgar G., with no surname, corporate filing signed in looped penmanship eerily akin to Karim's, though perhaps that was paranoia tinting my perception. Imam Yusuf joined the inquiry, his calm tinsel as braided steel. Together we visited the levee staging yard at dawn, snow crunching under boots. No Forefront truck sat among the rows of equipment. The shift supervisor, rubicund cheeks chapped raw by wind, claimed Forefront crews arrived overnight to avoid traffic snarls. He produced manifests dense with QR codes. My phone scanned one, it redirected to a dead URL. By noon Leah published her findings, front page, bold type, second wave of fraud. The county courthouse rustled with urgent footsteps. The board convened that evening inside the library, its fluorescent glow flickering like a nervous eyelid. Rachel Kim teleconferenced from Washington, image pixelated by hotel Wi-Fi, but her voice cut sharp: freeze payments to Forefront, subpoena their records, trigger the performance bond. Votes passed with little dissent. Exhaustion had taught us speed. Federal marshals padlocked Forefront's rented yard that very night. What followed was anticlimax and revelation both. The bond insurer delivered a stack of documents showing Forefront's founder had recently died of a stroke, real man, real obituary, but his identity hijacked weeks after burial. Digital forensics traced the forgery to the same constellation of IP addresses tied to the Qaider threats. Whoever orchestrated this second siphon was no opportunistic local. He, or they, possessed patient knowledge of regulatory seams and grief-softened loopholes. Still, the breach had failed. Our transparency, tiresome, relentless, spotted the rot before it dug in. Leah penned an editorial comparing the process to the Prophet's guidance on inspecting market goods: lift the grain, expose the damp kernels beneath. She quoted the hadith, translated and footnoted, then concluded, sunlight is prophetic. The phrase went viral across state press. Within days, state senators championed bills mandating real-time public dashboards for infrastructure spending. Sometimes, it seemed, righteousness could spread quicker than vice. Yet victory left me restless. At the diner, between flipping turkey patties for high school wrestlers carb-loading before regionals, I caught myself scanning faces for menace. My father, stronger now, noted my distraction and pulled me aside. He handed me the torn halves of the original laminated verse he'd once discarded. He had taped them back together, though the seam remained visible. Nothing returns to its first innocence, he said, but everything can carry witness. He nodded toward the road, where snowplows pushed furrows into luminous ridges, a scripture in negative space, light carved by dark. That night, insomnia pressed my skull like a vice. I slipped into the diner's storeroom, lights off, and scrolled through the entire vault ledger one final time. Unallocated balance, $982,000 and change, interest accrued while auditors wrestled. With board approval stalled by procedural fatigue, the remainder risked stagnation. I considered dispersing it piecemeal: mosque repairs, volunteer firehouse gear, but clandestine charity now felt akin to tampering with evidence. I closed the laptop and whispered istighfar until dawn tinted the floorboards honey brown. Morning delivered clarity in the shape of a letter from the State University's engineering dean. Their hydrology department sought partners to study our levee as a model for climate-resilient rural flood control, contingent on community funding to match grant dollars. The program included internships for local youth. Here lay synthesis: redeeming money by marrying it to knowledge, binding future custodians to the lessons carved from our pain. The board approved within 48 hours. Public votes came via live stream, each eye punctuated by scrolling Quranic calligraphy overlay: Rachel Kim's idea, bridging civic and spiritual witness. Weeks flowed. Students in orange vests measured seepage while explaining Bernoulli equations to second graders on field trips. The diner's jukebox added a new track list curated by teenagers who discovered vinyl warmth. Jazz now mingled with conscious hip-hop quoting Rumi. Tourists stopped to photograph the levee's interpretive signs, one of which displayed Karim's verse in Arabic and English alongside a timeline of the flood and recovery. Context, not erasure. Inevitably, winter cracked under the heel of March. Ice floes clinked like shattered glass drifting aside to make way for silt-laden currents. On a Saturday bright as polished steel, the first test of the levee arrived. Snowmelt plus 3 days of rain upriver conspired to send the Missouri swelling 5 feet above minor flood stage. Town grocers sandbagged their loading docks. My father, ignoring doctor's orders, donned his old waders and insisted we inspect sluice gates at dawn. There, under sodium glow, we watched water slosh inches below the parapet, only to slide back into engineered spillways exactly as designed. Pumps hummed like contented bees. By noon the crest plateaued, by dusk it receded. No alarms, no evacuations, just a collective breath released, visible in the cold air like balloons freed from trembling fists. That evening a community potluck filled the high school gym, halal brisket beside Lutheran green bean casserole, samosas flirting with deviled eggs. Children chased each other between folding tables, cheeks smeared with barbecue sauce that did not respect denominational boundaries. Police Chief White, who once dismissed our threats as teenage mischief, conceded during a toast that vigilance, not suspicion, had shielded us. Glasses of iced tea clinked. Imam Yusuf recited verses of gratitude, his voice resonant as a double bass string. For a heartbeat I felt Karim's shadow lingering near the bleachers, curious whether this unity counted as part of his neglected legacy. I prayed God granted him measure enough to see it, measure enough to repent. Later, beneath a sky river deep with stars, I walked the highway ribbon alone. Trucks pulsed past, their taillights a rosary of ember beads. I remembered how Karim once said roads resembled Quranic verses, plain by day, revealing by night. Tonight the verse felt expanded, a reminder that deceit is punished not only in the deceiver but in those who, by apathy or haste, allow it room to root. Yet the Qur'an balances every warning with promise: after hardship comes ease, after misguidance, guidance if sought sincerely. I pulled the taped verse from my coat pocket, edges softened by weeks of thumb worry. The seam where it had torn remained, yes, but the calligraphy still sang. I whispered the translation, letting the winter air taste the syllables: if Allah should aid you, none can overcome you, but if he should forsake you, who is there that can aid you after him? So in Allah let the believers put their trust. Trust, I realized, is not abstraction, it is gravel under soles, code in ledgers, rivets in cranes, words published in daylight. Trust is the sum of small guardings, of levy seams inspected, of invoices queried, of hearts checked for corrosion. We had learned, painfully, to guard. Behind me, the diner's sign flickered to life, neon cursive reflecting on melting snowbanks, Rashid's Place. My father must have risen from his nap to greet the handful of truckers chasing night schedules. I turned back, footsteps crunching, pulse steady. Our story, like the river, would never freeze permanently. Currents of complacency, greed, or simple forgetfulness would test the banks again. But now the town owned its vigilance the way farmers own calluses, evidence of toil, badge against future storms. At the threshold I paused, catching a final glimpse of the highway stretching west, sodium lamps glowing like prayer lamps for travelers unknown. Somewhere beyond that horizon new deceits were surely incubating, wearing disguises as gracious as Karim's first smile. Yet my fear had cooled into readiness. I stepped inside, bell jingling, warmth kissing my cheeks. My father flipped a pancake with theatrical flourish, winked. Jazz crackled over the rebuilt speakers, this time Duke Ellington, Come Sunday, chords rising like supplication. And so the verse returned to its place on the wall, not as talisman but as compass we confirmed with each decision. The patched seam remained visible, but perhaps that was the final mercy, a scar to remind us that wholeness earned through fracture carries a tensile strength unimagined by the flawless. Outside, snowmelt trickled in gutters, whispering over and over the single Arabic root both verse and river share: Amina, to be secure, to trust, to believe.